Welcome to They Live by Film, a film discussion podcast focusing on the Criterion Channel and beyond. My name is Adam Lundy, and I am joined as always by my co-hosts Chris Haskell and Zach Bryant. How are you doing today, guys?
Hey,
Hey, how's it going?
All
this
good.
is this is the week I was supposed to have been in the UK.
Oh, okay. I forgot about it. I was actually only thinking about this a couple of hours ago, and that you were going to be coming over to Europe soon. So what happened with that?
So we just got an email saying the flights were canceled, and do we want to reschedule a refund? We just took the refund option.
Yeah, better off.
Um,
That
yeah,
sucks.
yeah, yeah. People can't get it together, but that's all right. We're going to Colorado next week, so it'll still be fun.
Nice. Yeah, I know the UK being super strict on who they let in and out of the country at the moment, so maybe that has something to do with it.
I'm sure. I'm sure it's that, and also there's a direct flight from Austin to London that, in the best of times, goes twice a week. So
Hmm.
you know, I'm guessing they just don't have the people for it now too. It's expensive to fly, to actually get the plane off the ground. So, um, anyways, they didn't give a reason, but we just got a refund. So we're here. I get to do the podcast now instead of missing a week, which is great. A good silver lining. And yeah, we'll try again in the spring if we can they can figure this thing out by ourselves.
Cool. So we'll get cracking. So this week, by pure fate alone, ended up being a women in film week. We're going to be talking about three different films, all of which follow a female protagonist. They're not made by female filmmakers. I understand actually now that calling it a women in film week might be a little bit confusing. But yeah, it basically three films, three sort of strong female protagonists, sort of dealing with different things in life in different ways. We're going to kick it off with a 1952 film by Fritz Lang called Clash by Night. Just to give you a quick intro as to what this is about, the IMDb page for this reads: May Doyle comes back to her hometown a cynical woman. Her brother Joe fears that his love fish canary worker Peggy may wind up like May. May marries Jerry and has a baby. She is happy but restless, drawn to Jerry's friend Earl. Whoever wrote that did a really crappy job. That's a pretty bad. Well, it's not. It's a pretty good description of the film. It's just really poorly worded. Basically, Barbara Stanwyck does Barbara Stanwyck things. Comes back to a sleepy small town and marries this nice fella, nice sort of small town peachy keen guy, but ends up being drawn to his sort of bad boy asshole friend. Um, what do we think of Clash by Night? I'm curious to know Zach's reaction more so because this was unfortunately his first Fritz Lang film, which is not maybe not the best way to start. But anyone want to jump in particular with their thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I can just go ahead and jump in. I kind of felt, and we'll get to this with Pandora's Box too, that I did think the second half of the film was a little bit more interesting when kind of the melodrama, because it's a pretty melodramatic film. I mean, that's kind of the point of it, and it's in that sense. Once that kind of came about, it became a little bit more interesting, a little bit better to think about. The first half is just kind of feels a little meandering. I thought the performances were really good, though. And the only other thing I think of is Joe's an asshole. I guess that's my thoughts.
So They Shoot Pictures has it as 2104, which to me feels
Too high, way too high.
yeah, because if you think about the math behind that, that means there's a lot of people that put it either in a top 10 list or maybe a top 100 list, which blows my mind. Um, I'm guessing people that like Fritz Lang, maybe there's a particular reason they like Fritz Lang, and like this was a good example of that. I just, if I think about something like M, I mean, just to take the most obvious kind of example, but like, and contrasted to this, it just feels like two different directors, like two different, like, I don't even know. There's just nothing. Like M is the most imaginative storytelling, like, right, creative set design, like great shadow play, like, and this was just kind of like a studio film. Like maybe at the time kind of Oscar baity from the performances, but felt very bland. I'm going to do my best to talk about the themes in this because the themes are more interesting to me than the actual movie itself. But yeah, what about you, Adam?
Yeah, I definitely feel the same. Like Fritz Lang, as you guys know, and the listeners probably know by now, is one of my favorite directors. I love a lot of his work, both his German work and then a lot of his film noirs. This one, it just, yeah, like it was very bland. Some moments were noirish, and then other moments, as Zach said, very melodramatic, very Douglas Sirkian, in a way. But it never really commits to either. Like it probably could have been a really good melodrama or a really good noir,
Mm-hmm.
and it tried to be both, and it just failed. And comparing it to a studio film is interesting as well because there is no Langian aspects really in this film. Like Fritz Lang has a lot of sort of tropes, and none of which are really present in this film. Like honestly, if his name wasn't on the credits, I wouldn't have even known he directed it. So
Exactly.
yeah, like I was kind of let down in a way. When I say let down, I was saying to Zach before we started recording that I honestly didn't even know this film existed, even when I was compiling my list to do my Fritz Lang run through. I like completely overlooked this film. I see why. There's so many better Fritz Lang films out there, and even there's so many better Fritz Lang films that have the same themes as this film out there. So, yeah, I was very disappointed, unfortunately.
What's oh man, this is not going to be very interesting if we can't get this answer quickly. We can just move on. There's a Criterion movie that where there's a guy who's kind of like bullied and picked on, and then it's in a small town America.
Are you? I think I know exactly what you're talking about. Oh shit! I only watched it recently. Like, if I
Yeah,
look at my diary, I'll find it.
I think I even might have been reminded of it from something you wrote. Anyways, the reason I'm bringing it up. If we can do a recall, the reason I'm bringing it up is because it was a better example of a story that on the surface I think was pretty thin, but the way that they kind of wrote it was an interesting melodrama. It wasn't like the issue I had with this with Clash by Night was it felt like in a weird way it felt like they were trying to impart like a particular morality on us and like or at least assume that the audience all shared a similar morality, and a lot of it was that kind of old classic like Americana type of morality.
Hmm.
And so a lot of the drama, in order to get behind the drama, you have to subscribe to that same morality. Otherwise, it doesn't land. It's more of like just a academic exercise, right? You're like, okay, I get it. Like that's not like that guy doesn't share the same values as that guy. Like, okay, fine. But it doesn't really have the same emotional impact. Like I don't think the themes were universal, especially in 2021.
I would
Uh,
say the one thing that's interesting is not necessarily the themes, but I guess that clash, just use the title here a little bit, but like, we get into like, I can't remember the characters. Is her name May?
yeah, May is
Yeah.
the
You know,
character. Yeah.
for her to not want to be a traditional housewife, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
especially then, that's completely acceptable. I think the morality comes with the fact that she dragged someone down with her because she couldn't commit to that decision. And I guess that's a little bit more. It's hard to say it's universal because in that case, neither one of them are wrong. But I guess you could say, is slightly more in the wrong because she kind of knew this about herself and did something against her own judgment anyway, which affected other people. But I mean, if we take them in a vacuum, neither are wrong, and that's kind of the interesting part.
Okay, so fantastic point. And can I just play devil's advocate on that?
Absolutely.
Like this is exactly my because I was thinking the same thing, but then it ends with them getting back together, right? So it's like they have this kind of Hollywood ending bolted on.
Do they get back together at the end? I didn't quite get that.
Uh, I mean,
I guess it did. I guess to me, it seemed like he was just accepting that it was. Maybe I missed something. If I did, feel free to call me out on it. But it seemed to me that he was just accepting that he's not going to be the selfish person that just keeps her away from her child and knowing he's not going to like put the child in this danger on a boat just because he's petty about it. But
Yeah.
it is the end. I could have misunderstood what they were going for.
No,
there.
it's a fair point. I mean, maybe I did. Maybe I missed it. It just felt like they had that kind of like loving glance right at the end there. That
Yeah, to me, if obviously the film is not very explicit as to whether or not they got back together, because if it was, then it would be obvious to all of us and they would have shown it. But yeah, it's sort of maybe implicitly implied that maybe they can be amicable at the very least, if not get back together, you know. But
yeah, I guess it does try to leave on a hopeful note, like maybe later on, if they're not now, maybe it can work later, instead of the idea that maybe two incompatible people just don't need to be together, but it doesn't mean they can't be civil.
100%, yeah, especially when there's like a child involved, you know.
interesting. So it's more of like a Chasing Amy ending.
Yes. Who would have known Kevin Smith remake Clash by Night?
This is Kevin Smith's take on Clash by Night.
By the way, Chris, I think the film you were thinking of is Moonrise.
Yes,
from
yes,
Frank Borzage.
Yes, that's it. That's the one.
That's a great film. That's really good. If you want a film that does sort of tackle both melodrama and film noir, Moonrise by Frank Borzage does a great job of straddling that line.
Thank you. I was doing a search for Douglas Sirk. For some reason, I thought it was his, but Borzage makes way more sense.
Yeah. Well, look, I suppose they're kind of from the same sort of school of melodrama, really, aren't they? Like, Borzage or I don't know how to pronounce his surname, Borzage, whatever. Yeah, him and Sirk are kind of similar in a way. And well, they came from a similar era, obviously.
Yeah. Well, speaking of women in film, I feel like we have to at least mention the Marilyn Monroe in this. So I was digging around a little bit just on this. Did you know that like during production of this movie is when her first big photo shoot dropped?
Oh, really? Is that why it was like a smaller role then, I assume?
I mean, I don't know exactly, but they were already well into production before it did. But this is when her Playboy shoot dropped, and apparently that, if you can imagine the flood of journalists that came to the set because this was a big deal, right around in that same kind of few weeks right after it dropped. So apparently it caused a huge stir in the production and like a huge disruption.
I say that pissed Fritz off.
Yeah, right. Like he's got a control over like every aspect of like every film he's made, and then this Marilyn Monroe certainly was bigger than him. I mean,
it's like three. It's like she's in 3 scenes.
Yeah. I don't even know that we would have spectacles like that nowadays. Like, what would even be similar? I can't imagine something that would be as like.
You have to have like a sports star playing in a movie, like. That'd be the only thing I could think of that would be similar, and even that's become kind of normal.
Like the equivalent today would be a sex tape, maybe.
Yeah, if we're gonna go that direction, yeah, I guess.
Yeah,
like Paris Hilton,
like Ronaldo.
Yeah.
Just in terms of something that would cause a similar stir.
Well, Marilyn Monroe was causing stirs anyway. I don't know if you ever read about the production of Some Like It Hot. Apparently that was an absolute train wreck because of Monroe. Apparently, like Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis used to like take bets on how many times she would need to do a take, because she just kept messing everything up. Like,
wow, that's crazy, right? I mean, well, I won't get into it. It's just a different era. It's interesting looking at the impact she had back then on like culture, just in general, right? She was like larger than so much in culture, and seeing her now, like it doesn't quite make sense, but I guess it's different. Like being not being in it,
Yeah.
I don't know if we have. Anyways, I've thought about this with Michael Jordan and Michael Jackson, as well as like the Beatles, as like some of these acts. I don't know if we're ever going to have something that kind of duplicates that type of stardom, right?
Well, see, the problem is that the people who are now in those kind of levels of stardom are not actually very talented. It's like a Kim Kardashian.
Yeah, that's a great, interesting point. So every time she posts a picture of her in front of a mirror, it gets like 100 million views, right?
Exactly. So like if you can imagine like what it would have been like to make a film back then with Marilyn Monroe is probably like if you wanted to try and make a film and have Kim Kardashian in it. Imagine the paparazzi would be all over the set trying to sort of get pictures of Kim Kardashian's first acting role, for example. That's the sort of best sort of modern twist I can maybe put on this, except for the fact that obviously Marilyn Monroe is obviously an actress and Kim Kardashian is a glorified porn star. But
I think it might be, going back to like the way like paparazzi and stuff, with Monroe, there was like this sense of positivity with her role. Like, if you had Kim Kardashian, the whole thing would be like, what kind of story can we get here? And obviously more negative ones are going to sell. And I think that's a whole thing too. You mentioned the Beatles, that I think it's a lot of this constant access we have to information that, like when the Beatles came over from the UK, it was a big deal because, the British invasion, it led to the Stones, it led to Sex Pistols and all that, being a big part of that music industry. And I'm not even sure if something like that's possible anymore, because if there's, you look at K-pop, there's no invasion of that. People are just into it because you have access to everything. It's not learning new information because it's always there.
Yeah, it's not like bands had to come over and try and make it in America like they used to do sort of before the internet blew up.
Just make it on Spotify now.
Exactly. You can listen to anything anywhere in the world. You can listen to some indie artist in the Philippines who has 10 monthly listeners easily just by searching them. That's true. So it just doesn't really exist. Well, everything now, because of the internet, everything has become so much closer. But it kind of says a lot about Clash by Night how off the rails this conversation has gone.
I'm going to tie it in right now. So what's $1.5 million in today's money? Let's see. Anyways, I can see if I can do this quickly, but it did transfer to the box office. So the movie made $1.5 million. In the box office back in 1952, which is probably, I guess I'd have to look it up really quick, 15 million-ish, something like that nowadays. It was made on a pretty tight budget, and it had a long rental and kind of video life as well after theatrical. So it was a financial success. So it worked, in that sense, it worked. It's just boring. I mean, it's an example of a film that's kind of boring, right? And just kind of like it survived on star power, very thin, everything else, I think.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm gonna make sure I say her name. Barbara Stanwyck. That's how you say her last name, right?
Stanwyck.
I think it's Stanwyck.
Okay, Stanwyck. This was kind of, I'm not gonna say the dip in her career, but this was after she got nominated. Like her last nomination was like 4 years before that. So it's kind of the part of her career too, where she's not getting these award nominations anymore right towards the end. I don't know how long she acted, but I don't think she got the recognition at this point like she was before.
Yeah.
No, and like she wasn't even, I suppose she was about 40, I want to say about 44, 45 when she made this, if my maths is right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks like just about, yeah, that's right, right around 45.
So, even nowadays it's kind of the same, but especially back in the old Hollywood days, like your career is pretty much over once you get past 35.
And I guess it says a lot to have someone like Monroe there, because it almost, I'm not gonna say it's like a willing passing of the torch, but it's kind of like an embodiment of that kind of mentality towards actresses, especially, but actors and actresses of that time. That she was successful. She did her thing, but now Monroe's coming in, and I think she was like 20, 22 at that time. So,
yeah, it could be seen as like a passing of the torch kind of a thing.
I wouldn't say it would be a willing one, but it's there.
No, I don't think Barbara would be that kind of girl.
So someone brought up in the chat when we were having in our weekly discussion around this about how it's almost like it was a meta role for her. Because it's like in her career, we got to see her as this fiery young starlet who was like winning hearts and minds, winning awards, right? And then as she was kind of falling out of favor with the public a little bit, she makes this movie, which is her like coming home and having a moment of reflection on things that, they never really described like what she was doing exactly back east. So there's an opportunity, if you want to look at it through that lens, that this is kind of a meta role for her, which is kind of a cool take, I thought.
They did kind of clarify. If maybe I'm completely misremembering this, but wasn't it she was like the mistress of a politician,
Mm-hmm.
and
They
when he
allude to it a
died,
little bit. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, like he died and he left her nothing, so she was kind of chased out of town by the widow then. So not up to good girl things. But
Yeah,
it's
and
it's
I
it's
I guess it might be worth talking about too, because I mean, this film kind of relies on this, the relationship between her and Jerry. If it, obviously we know it doesn't work, but at some point they also have to have some chemistry to make it believable that they would even attempt to get married. And I guess it's the idea of what Jerry really sees in May, besides, he obviously feels a lot of affection towards her. That's kind of the problem, is it's not as mutual as they need it to be.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of interesting because he's so trying to think of the word. He's a very passive individual. Like, he's he kind of just lets things go. He goes with the flow. He just tries to see the good in everyone. And she's a lot more cynical. She's very cynical compared to him about how things are. And it's kind of interesting. And it could just be that they thought it'd be interesting to just put these two people so far apart. But watching it, it does. You can almost see why it almost works. Like when you're watching it, it doesn't feel like they're so far apart it can. It's just unwillingness to almost.
their
Yeah.
dynamic is almost like almost like a sort of city mouse, country mouse kind of thing. He's
Mm-hmm.
lived in the small fishing town. He's just happy, sort of content in that life, and she's had the taste of the big city life with the lavish lifestyle. So like her cynicism towards it all is kind of understandable. Like if that was the lifestyle she had grown accustomed to, and suddenly she's sort of back, in the place where she felt she had escaped from and grown out of, then like I can understand that. None of this obviously excuses the way she treats Jerry in the film. She basically digs her claws in, sees an easy sort of, just an easy way for her to get some kind of stability in this town, and sort of maybe takes advantage of his sort of niceness and naivety, and ends up obviously, doing the dirty on him. But I can kind of understand why she would be sort of very cynical about everything, because of her experiences versus Jerry, who's very just sort of contented, probably because he just doesn't know any better than what he's experienced in the small town.
Right.
Well, I think we've probably reached about the max we can talk about this movie, but I have one other quick point, and if y'all are okay with this, I think just to kind of counter what you said, I think the way that I read her character, she was giving it an honest effort. Like, I don't think she was malicious against Jerry when she got into the relationship with him, right? Like, I think there was a part of her that wanted that. Just like, there's a part of me that wants to go on a diet and exercise, right? And but here I
Right.
am.
Well, I think she was hope that you fake it until you make it, sort of thing. Like, as long as if I keep playing the housewife, I will be content as the housewife.
Yeah.
If I have this kid, I will be content as the mother. And I think that was kind of the interesting part, is she did kind of gain that mother element. Like, she did, as cynical as she did care about her kid. She never wanted to leave. And that was kind of the big part between her and Joe, was that she wouldn't leave without the kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
She did develop as a character. I suppose we can't say she didn't. Just one quick thing I'll bring up then, just before we wrap up on this film. If someone's like Zach out there, and you've never seen a Fritz Lang film, or this is your only Fritz Lang film, if you want to watch a Fritz Lang film that deals with adultery, watch Scarlet Street, The Woman in the Window, and Human Desire, because all three are much, much, much better than this film. And two of the three star Joan Bennett, who is just awesome as a femme fatale. So if there's any other Lang virgins out there, definitely consider watching any of those three. But in particular, Scarlet Street. Scarlet Street is a film noir classic. It's dark, it's brooding. It has Edward G. Robinson, who's awesome. Yeah. Any other Fritz Lang than this, but specifically Scarlet Street.
All right, and for our next film, we're going to be watching Pandora's Box. Insert German pronunciation here, if Adam would like to. This is by G.W. Pabst. The film is about the rise and inevitable fall of an amoral but naive young woman who's incessant. Oh, there we go. That's how that word's spelled. Incessant eroticism inspires lust and violence in those around her. I almost did really good there until that one word tripped me up.
I'm kind of curious about the German pronunciation because I didn't even look it up.
I can give it a college try here.
Yeah, it's not.
Die Boucher der Pandora. It's probably completely butchered, and I don't even care.
Second half, the easy half was fine. It's Die Buchse. Die Buchse. Die Buchse. Yeah, you have the umlaut over the U, so it drags out the U sound. It's kind of like an accent if you've ever done like French or anything like that. It's kind of like an accent. It drags out the sound.
Gotcha.
Die Buchse der Pandora. Very good. Yeah, Pandora's Box. I love this film. It started off not too good for me. I don't know if you guys are in the same boat. It kind of starts. It's weird. It starts slow, but it also starts like right in the middle of something. So at the same time, you're trying to play catch up to who these characters are, but then also not a lot is really happening at the same time. So it has a really abrasive sort of starting sort of 15, 20 minutes or so. But once I got into the flow of who these characters were and, what was sort of going on in the world around them, I was straight in. I've seen two other Pabst films before this, Camarade Shaft and Westfront 1917. And he's a super... I'm going to instill the wrath of Zach by saying he's an underrated director. But I think he is. Like, not enough people talk about him when we're talking about sort of classic directors, and Pandora's Box is a really good example of how good he is.
For me, with the pacing, I think what really, because I'm with you, the second half I think is just much stronger. Really, I just felt like the story they tell in like the first 4 or 5 acts, because this is split across, is it 8 acts? I think it's 8.
Yeah, I think it was 8. Yeah.
The story for the first 5 is something I just kind of sat there and was like, you can kind of tell this in 15 minutes. And we're like, because the inciting incident is, since this is only halfway, I don't feel like this is too much of a spoiler here, is when she kills her new husband in self-defense. Yeah. Like, I mean, that's the inciting incident. So, I mean, the first, really, it's about like, you take, like, I'll take the second act, because I do remember that one. You don't really learn a lot in the second act, just that people are just kind of like, should you marry this person? And that's kind of all you really get out of that. But it goes on for like 15 or 12 or 15 minutes, I would say. And that was really where it kind of like, once the incident happens after their marriage, I'm really into it. It just takes me a little while because I feel like it kind of drags itself out for a while.
Yeah, like I think it is definitely, even though it's split into acts rather than parts, it is a film of 2 halves. And I think the first half is just more so about establishing Lulu as a character, the things that she does, the things that are within her power, if we want to call them, just because she does almost have this near supernatural ability of just bending everyone to her will. So the first half is very much a case of setting up who Lulu is, the things she's capable of doing, the things she has done, the things she can do. And then the second half is more a reaction of the things she has done and the consequences associated with that.
Yeah, so They Shoot Pictures has this at 289.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, and
make the call, too high, too low. Who wants to make that call? I think it sounds about right to me personally, but
I don't mind it.
Yeah, I'm not insulted by it.
I've thought about this film a lot after I saw it. Like there's 2 main threads I kind of want to like that I think about when I think about this film. One is how much I hate sort of like the code that came in. I know this was a German film, but the idea that this type of art was made in 1929 with this much of a complex morality. We were just talking about morality with Clash by Night. I think this is an incredibly complicated and nuanced morality in the movie. When you look at this woman as the hero, like as the protagonist, anyways, like what a deep, like kind of rich character study. And then I also think about the representation of women in movies in general, and like, maybe Charlize Theron in Monster has a similar type of discussion where you can at least you sympathize for somebody who's making bad decisions because you kind of see what's going on in her life around her. But like this type of woman doesn't get a lot of representation in this way, and it's a shame because it's like, at least in the way that Paps did it here, it's fascinating, right? Like you mentioned power, like she's clinging on to power where she can have it, and she's using what she can to survive in a pretty tough world. Like 1929, nobody, it was kind of a tougher world, different world. But like, and the people around her are making it really difficult for her to kind of get any footing in any kind of foundation, right? And stability in her life. So she's constantly in survival mode. And yeah, like she does some bad things, like she does some nasty things, and she's kind of like almost like a devil character at times. But like it's not without sympathy, right? That just this nuance is just, I loved it. Like it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's interesting because there is no really black and white answer as to whether Lulu is a good character or whether she's a bad character.
Yeah.
She certainly does bad things, but at the same time, the bad things she's doing are, a lot of it are sort of in the context of the time that we're speaking of. This idea of, sort of going around and meeting other guys and things like that. A lot of the things that she does in this film that are supposedly bad are not really all that bad in the sort of, in a modern context. And obviously, a lot of the time when you have to sort of read a film in the context of its era, it's hard to sort of enjoy a lot of older films if you can't sort of look past that. But she's incredibly complex character. The film is really, really anchored by her. And Paps did a fantastic job of directing her. Especially the fact that she was American, he was German, so obviously there would have been a language barrier there as well. So the fact that they were able to sort of work together to get this almost like ethereal performance. She's almost like a force of nature. So yeah, she's definitely the star of this film. Like, this is not a film that, we're probably not going to talk about visuals or cinematography a whole ton or anything like that. This is as close to a pure character study as you can really get in cinema.
Yeah, she's a superhero, and not enough people, or maybe anybody, focused on this on the discussion. So I want to kind of ask y'all about it here. One of the characters that I think about the most as I kind of look back on the movie are those two guys that followed her around and were sort of like the devils over her shoulder, the Siglock and Quest.
The one, that whole thing, and I'd like to hear what exactly their part is, because they were kind of the ones that, I guess you could say, confused me a little bit, because she calls one of them her father at one point, right? But obviously that's not what's going on there. It's just, it's so confusing.
Yeah, I think it's more so like a father figure. I was kind of confused by it as well. So I read the Wikipedia entry, and like they describe him as like a previous sort of guy that she had sort of got her sort of fingers in. That sounds way bad. Like, yikes. You know what I mean? She's like a previous guy that she had sort of wrapped up in her schemes.
She Gulch is her first customer, right? That's how the movie starts.
That's why the father line confused me. I was like, what?
Oh, sorry. Maybe I'm mixing it up then with the other character. No, yeah. She Gulch.
That's why I was confused.
Yeah, no, I am thinking of the right guy. Yeah, she Gulch sort of is the guy that shows up at the very start, and this is what I was saying earlier. The film just kind of just throws you in the middle of these people's lives. He just shows up, and apparently, according to Wikipedia, her first patron.
Mm-hmm.
So I would assume, unless Paps want to be very, very bold, that they are not really father and daughter, but she essentially looks at him as like almost like a father figure, perhaps, maybe. But I don't know. That sounds weird as well, just the way that she treats him. But maybe I don't know.
I mean,
It's a complex relationship, obviously.
is it possible it's like sugar daddy? Like that's
Possibly. I don't know if that was a phrase that would have been used in that era.
but daddy
But
was
the
used like
idea,
that, right? In a lot of the 20, like in a lot of the kind of like 20s culture, it's like, hey, daddy, come on, like let's go party, that kind of thing, right? Like,
really, I don't know. I honestly can't say. I genuinely don't know the
Now,
answer. But
Adam, you can't question Chris. If we're going to count who watches, who collects the most porn in this group, it's Chris. So he would know.
That's true.
well, yeah. I'll wear that mantle, I guess. That's funny. No, but like I think that's a slang term from the 20s. I think I've heard that before. Like, if you're talking to like
Like I've heard it in a jazz context, like
yeah,
a daddy-o, but like
yeah.
not the connotation that maybe it would have nowadays. I don't know if they said it in that context, but I know the old sort of jazz sort of, hey daddy-o, that kind of thing. But I digress. It's still an interesting relationship. I was more so interested by her relationship with Alva because she's apparently very good friends with this dude while trying to sort of seduce his dad. Like that's just weird, and he like just seemingly does not have a problem with this. He's like super chill with the whole idea of his friend seducing his dad. And
Yeah, and
even that
it's
is
hard because you
weird.
don't know the context of how his dad and her really got into this. I mean, I assume he just literally fell in love with his hooker, and I mean, I'm like, you're told you're not supposed to do that, but I'm
It's the
like, I
first
guess
rule.
it's to go with.
But is she even a hooker though? She strikes me more as a gold digger.
I mean, they call her a call girl at one time, don't they?
It
Perhaps.
could be derogatory. It could be meant to kind of insult her though. Like I think she's more
Yeah.
like an escort or something, if anything, right? Or like she's using this kind of to get into relationships and like for protection, I think, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Like I honestly I didn't even look at her. I just looked at her like a party girl who was a gold digger, basically, sort of clutched onto these rich guys to try and get money and protection or whatever. Like so, I didn't even sort of think of it in a call girl escort context. I just
Well,
looked
I
at it
guess
like she was a
part of
party
me
girl.
did because of the end, which we'll do a warning about before that. But I guess
Yeah.
because of the
Yeah.
very end of the film.
Yeah, but that to me seems as though she was more so forced to maybe okay, I'm gonna sort of throw this idea out here. I'm kind of spitballing here. Um so from the way I see it, at the start of the film, she is not a prostitute,
Okay.
call girl, whatever. She is a party girl who is a gold digger, basically goes out and clings on to these rich dudes who are looking for a bit of young love. Um Throughout the film, we see her plans fall apart. She is finally met with the consequences to all of her actions, and she eventually then is forced to become what everyone sort of thought of her as in the first place.
Okay, and you know what? I think that's actually really fair. I think that might actually be, yeah, I agree with that.
And
Okay.
I agree with that as well. And along the way, to your point about Alva, and then to the point about the woman whose name is, anyways, the Countess.
Oh yeah, that was interesting as well. Geschwitz or something along those lines.
Yeah, that's right. So she has these relationships that are where she's in total control of the dynamic of the relationship, and she kind of like, uses them in a sense to get to what she needs, right? But like I think a lot of these characters are kind of used just to show that side of her more than anything. Like I don't know, the relationship with Alba is confusing if you think about it, of the fact of like it's her good friend who's she's going after her dad, but or his dad. But it kind of makes sense. I think all these, if you look at the characters more as a whole, she sort of is put into these bad situations, right, in response to them, and kind of fights and claws for survival in the way that she can. And the only weapon she has to use is this like seductive capability, right? Like she's like a superhero of seduction, like a succubus almost or something. Although that's kind
Yeah.
of um, then that's the tragedy of the movie. To your point, right? It ends up like kind of coming back to her in a way where she has to then rely on that completely, which is not ever her goal.
Yeah, like she started off looking for rich men so that she would always live a life of luxury, and ended up in squalor because of the fact that she was going for these rich men, and eventually it just came back to bite her.
And it's a nice tie-in that she ends up so desperate that she gets Jack the Ripper in bed.
Okay, well, this is me and Zach. We're going to do a spoiler warning for this. So
Spoiler alert.
I'm sorry if Chris has ruined a film that's nearly 100 years old. So I suppose we might as well talk to the ending while we're here. So spoiler alert for the next few minutes. We're talking about the ending of the film. So after they leave that sort of casino boat thing that's something like out of Pinocchio, they end up living in squalor in London in a tenement building that is completely dilapidated. And as sort of to my point that I made before, she is essentially forced to become a prostitute so that they can live, they can survive. Her Alva and Shy Glock, whatever the way you pronounce that dude's name. And yeah, Jack the Ripper, that came out of so left field.
Yeah.
And
That
it's
was
kind of
such a turn.
interesting since at this point it had been 35, 40 years since the Jack the Ripper cases. So there's a technicality that, in a weird way, almost like Memories of Murder, where there's this whole thing of like, he talks about the reason he looks at the screen is because he knows the killer could watch the movie. In a weird way, that's true for this as well. There's a chance that Jack the Ripper was alive to see this movie.
Yeah, that's
And
very true. Yeah.
Oh wow, yeah.
It's weird, like, because when I think of Jack the Ripper, I just think of like a completely different era. And like knowing it's only like 30, 40 years before this came out, it's just weird to me. Like when I think of Jack the Ripper, I think of like Edwardian England, like horse and
Hey.
carriages and all that kind of stuff. I don't really think of him as someone who could have ever watched a film when really, I suppose technically maybe only like 10, 15 years after the last killing, he could have watched early films.
yeah, and to have yourself, someone you don't even know who they are that representing you in a film. I mean, it's kind of a weird thing to think about, like how quickly they did something like this. Because I mean, that would be like in the '90s, someone choosing to have like the movie end with the Zodiac killer killing you.
Yeah, and but is that so strange though to have that? I don't think it is. Like I'm sure
I
there's
don't think it's a
plenty
bad
of
thing. It's just kind of like, it does feel out of left field because they're like, oh, we're going to use like something
a
real
real
here that
serial
actually
killer.
happened to like tie it in at the end.
Yeah, it was a strange choice. It was a fun choice, and I applaud Pap's boldness for doing it. But yeah, it was super out of left field that suddenly she gets murdered by Jack the Ripper. Like it's not like if I had to take a bet before I started watching the movie as to how that film would end, that would be a long, long shot of a bet to make. I would not have even entered my mind as a possible. Well, even her getting murdered probably wouldn't have even been in my mind as a possibility, let alone by Jack the Ripper.
Right. Yeah, she had an air of kind of invincibility for a lot of the film, right? Where she could always find a way out of the situation.
Well, this is it. Like, especially like, as we said, sort of midway through the film, when it looks as though she might meet her end, suddenly she sort of manages to worm her way out and ends up killing the doctor, Alva's dad. So she does, and then on that sort of mad, crazy casino boat, she manages to elude sex slavery. She manages to elude a few other things. So she really does seem as though she can just always kind of worm her way out of a situation until Jackie Boy turns up with his switchblade. Or he didn't. He strangled her, didn't he? Or did he actually rip her?
I thought there was a knife on the table.
There
right?
was, yes. It was the knife threw him off. He threw away his knife, and then he noticed the knife that was upstairs. That was it.
Yeah.
Really cool imagery.
That's why you always do your dishes.
You can't get murdered if the dishes are put away in their proper place.
Right.
There's a
Or just
weird antithesis to this thing, because we're talking about it being a character study and all, and it's like almost like an antithesis to what Taxi Driver is in a way. Like with her, she's using her sexuality to get out of things. She's using her charm and stuff like that. While someone like Travis Bickle, who has been identified as celibate, involuntary and celibate, stuff like that, and the idea that it's this weird mix of the violence and the where I'm trying to there's just a lot to it, the especially with the end, like the success at the end for Travis Bickle and her downfall on this, and it almost feels like almost like polar opposite in the way they went about it, which I'm sure it's not on purpose. I just think it's an interesting kind of connection between them because of the way they're used.
Somebody that had no sexuality to use to their advantage, basically, right?
Right, and used the force of other ways to go through it, and while she had to like go as far into hers as maybe she never wanted to.
Yeah, just on that point, that's one thing I think is interesting. So the idea of specifically talking about the way she uses her sexuality, that's like the most intimate thing that we all have. At least that's the way it's commonly talked about, in whether it's spiritual discussions or in literature. A lot of times, like the idea that the control over our sexuality is like the thing that we have that's most dear, right? And then in contrast to that, the violation of that is the most egregious thing that can be done to us, right? The violation of our sexuality is the most egregious thing that can be done to us. Like that's the way those are commonly kind of discussed, right? And I mean, I'm not disagreeing with that. That's just like the kind of, it's the common kind of way. So I think that this film, but I just can't get it out of my head. It stayed with me in a really good way, is the way that it deals with sexuality. And I think I don't know if this is the right word, but like such a mature and like adult way. Like it's a very nuanced look into sexuality that I was just surprised was made 90 years ago. Like I don't know how else to say that. It did not match my perception of the way people spoke openly about sexuality in 1929, especially in a movie that was put out in wide release.
Yeah, like it's super complex in that regard as well. Like one sort of moment that stuck with me that we alluded to earlier was the interaction with the Countess. Obviously, basically the Countess is sort of subject to the same sort of charms that the men are. With Lulu, she can sort of wrap her around her finger as well. She even explicitly says something like, "Oh, the Countess has a thing for me." So even Lulu herself knows that she can charm women just as much as she can charm the men. And it's interesting, again, on this crazy casino boat that I just think is wild and funny. When she meets with the Countess and they're discussing their plan, they have this really tender moment where they're sort of embraced in one another. And I don't know if this was done on purpose or what the sort of context maybe could be behind this, but Lulu and the Countess have a much more tender moment than Lulu has with any other person in the whole film.
Yeah.
So like you're saying, it's a very mature picture, especially for its age. It's very frank in its depiction of sexuality, but there's a lot of nuance and a lot of complexity behind that. It's an incredibly put together film. I often say this, a film is really well put together, and I'm normally talking about it from a technical point of view with the direction or the cinematography or whatever. But here, just more so thematically, it's very well put together thematically. It's like Paps knew exactly what he wanted to articulate with this film, and he did so perfectly.
All right, and strong female leads in film week continues with 1970 film from Jacques Demy, which is Donkey Skin. In French, it's Peau d'Âne. And this is a very old fairy tale written by Charles Perrault. That same guy that wrote Sleeping Beauty and a handful of the other fairy tales, Cinderella, a handful of the other fairy tales we know very well. Probably did drugs to write this one, but it's the story of a young woman, daughter of a king, who is, through a series of circumstances, is courted by her dad, decides she doesn't want that relationship, and runs away, wearing the skin of a donkey, and ends up as a scullery maid, and has an opportunity to come back and meet a prince if she can figure out a fairy tale ending to her story. So I'll stop right there. What did you all think about this? Adam, I think you're the only one who has not gone first yet.
It's probably my third favorite Shrek movie. Look, I don't want to be overly negative, because I did like the film. I gave it a 4-star. Looks gorgeous. Colors are great. Set design, costume design, fantastic. It just didn't do enough for me, and I don't know if it was because Demi maybe sort of stuck to the fairy tales story too much. Everything was just too simple. You kind of feel like he's trying to not maybe radicalize, but maybe invert some of the tropes of fairy tales throughout the film, with the kind of like anachronistic songs, and this sort of music is kind of more modern. And then you have what's the fairy godmother actress? What's her name again? Sebring or something like that.
Yeah, I'll find it in just a second. She's great.
But yeah, like she's sort of like the cool sort of
Delphine.
modern Delphine Seyrig, is it?
Yep.
Yeah, like she's almost like a cool sort of modern woman, sort of stuck in this sort of fairy tale world almost. So you feel like he's trying to maybe invert some tropes, but it just kind of ends like a normal fairy tale, and it just at the end I kind of just went, oh, that's it. So I liked a lot of aspects of it. I just wish I just wish it did a bit more.
There's one element I will say I did not expect at the end, but we'll get to that later.
I know what you're talking about already. Yeah.
This actually wasn't really my first experience to the story Donkey Skin. It's not a very popular fairy tale. This isn't, Cinderella or anything like that. It's not as well known. But I was actually really looking forward to watching this because it's a major plot point in a Telltale game I played years ago, The Wolf Among Us, which is based on Fables comics about like fairy tale creatures from the world. But that's not important. So I was actually pretty excited to watch this, and I liked it. I won't say I loved it. It was enjoyable to watch at least once. I feel like, and I'm gonna probably say a lot of stuff Adam did, but I think the movie looks great. I love the weirdness to it, like all the horses on one kingdom are all blue, on the other one it's all red. It reminded me a lot of Beastmaster, where they paint the tiger black to make it look like a panther. But it's elements like that. It was fine, and there was some humor to it, which a little dark humor to it, which you'd expect from a fairy tale. And I don't know, I just felt like maybe John Borman should have directed this, and I probably would have liked it more. But it was fun.
So They Shoot Pictures has it as 1,610.
Okay.
Which, based off of both of y'all's reaction, I'm going to say you think is probably high.
Like anything outside the top 1,000, I just don't even care where it places, unless it's like something I really like outside the top 1,000. I'm not too fussy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say, yeah, I can name 1,600 movies that I would put in front of this, because I don't know if that's true or not. Maybe it is. I'm not
definitely not.
This part of so Jack Demy in general loved musicals, right? And that was a big part of his career, was sort of playing with the expectations of a musical while making a straight musical. Like, a lot of his stories are kind of dark in the subject matter, even when the music is bright. And I think that when hearing there's a special feature where he was kind of talking about how he just basically grew up with this story, right? And so even as a 7 and 8-year-old, he was doing puppet shows for his family, and he would do puppet shows with this story, which kind of shows how messed up the French are, because this story is like weird for kids. But this is just essentially like his love story to his childhood, right? And he made it He said he made it from the mindset of how he saw the story as a 7-year-old. So, like, as a 7-year-old, it wasn't weird that the dad wanted to marry the daughter. That was just like a fact in the story, right? He didn't have the same like adult kind of sensibilities of understanding those dynamics, right? He just like, oh, okay, it's just like a story. Like in this story, the dad wants to marry the daughter because she's the most beautiful in the land. Like that's a logical reason why the dad would want that, right? It was the request from the dying queen. And then he looked around everywhere. He couldn't find one. And he saw her in the garden and it just happened to be his daughter, right? Weird to say out loud. Let me say that. But like in the mind of a 7-year-old, I can at least I understand what he was trying to say, I guess.
Yeah, because I guess you're not thinking of it in a sexual nature, like we're naturally going to, like, oh, that's gross. Like,
yeah, right? Like he was.
Oh, he just really, really, really likes his daughter, you know.
Yeah,
not thinking about it any
on their
further
way.
than that.
Exactly, and he said that and I don't know if this is true. I don't have daughters, or was not a daughter ever, but apparently a lot of little girls, the first question you ask them, who do you want to marry, like they always say their daddy. Apparently that's a common thing to say as like a young, like 4 or 5-year-old like girl. They don't have the full concept of what that is.
Freud was right the whole time.
You what?
Freud was right the whole time.
Yeah, exactly. So I think he was kind of just like leaning really heavily into like the innocence of the way that this story was like written, like for the audience it was written, right? Like it was written for kids. They don't have the same concepts of how creepy and weird that is. Still don't understand why an adult would write this story, but that's a separate discussion. I think he had this interaction with like the story as just a fun, interesting tale of a woman that instead of the Cinderella shoe, in this case, it's the ring, right? That has to fit the finger, and like the prince that has to go and like find the right ring to fit the right finger. And like there is a lot of that magic and kind of fairy tale to it. Underneath the donkey skin, she's wearing these like beautiful robes, right? Almost like Superman or Spider-Man when they take off their clothes, they're like wearing in their spider suit. So like I think those aspects like captured his imagination, and he just wanted to bring forward his vision of how he saw it as an 8-year-old. I don't know if that makes it better or not, but I just thought that was an interesting take, I guess.
Well, no, I definitely agree with you in a lot of sense, because one of the things, I think one of the first things I thought when the movie finished was, I wish more fairy tale movies looked like this, because it does have like this sense of wonder and like that, like Willy Wonka. Not just because of the Smurf looking people that are in the movie, but in a sense, that's kind of the tone it has. It has this really Willy Wonka feel to it.
Yes. Yeah. So, anyways, I don't know. There's not a broader point there other than just to bring in like Demi's attempt or his perspective of why he made the film this way and why he kind of chose this story.
Because going back to like the colored horses and stuff, that's kind of something like when you're, the crude drawings of like old fairy tale books. It's like how do you distinguish which kingdom's which? The whole horse is just that color, not just like the armor or the clothing. It's the whole horse.
Yeah. Exactly. Is it like it's messed up that she's walking around in the donkey skin though? Like that's another point that's super messed up.
They don't even hide like the underside of the skin.
Oh, I know. I noticed that too.
It looks so gnarly on the side that the side that's touching her looks awful. Yeah. Like it's not like it's like it's not like they made like a donkey skin coat and there's nice lining on the inside. It's like now just the underside of the donkey skin.
I know.
Yeah, it's gross. Poor Balthazar.
Yeah.
R.I.P. But
have you all seen much of Demi's work?
This was my first.
Yeah, I saw Umbrellas of Cherbourg, which I liked more than this. But again, I feel like I'm being super negative on this film. It's not a bad film in any way, shape, or form. It's actually it's a good film. And you know what you guys are saying about sort of the imagery capturing like the childlike wonder. It has that childlike wonder atmosphere. You know, it's, you know, it looks like something that came straight from the mind of like a 7, 8 year old. Visually speaking, this is how you would imagine, you know, a fairy kingdom. Um, Obviously, like we know now, you know, as adults, when you visualize maybe medieval times and stuff where fairy tales normally take place, shit's a lot more grimier, gray, a lot more sort of desolate.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're a child, you think of it as colorful with all the sort of nice banners and the purple walls and
Mhm.
everyone wearing these nice colorful clothing, which probably is not very feasible in a medieval setting. So like yeah, visually, like it really does capture that childlike wonder. Um, but saying that though, I don't think it's an excuse to not do more with your story. You know, I get what you're saying that, oh, he made this film with the vision of, you know, him as a, you know, as a child reading these stories, but he wasn't a child making the film. He, you know, he could have tried harder with the story, because for all the work he did with creating this majestic sort of scenery and the other little bits of nuance he put in, like I said before, with the music and, you know, I forgot her freaking name again, but the fairy godmother, um, just to sort of end it so blandly, you know, oh, the ring fits, we're going to get married, I'm saved by the man, you
Spoiler
know,
alert. No, I'm just kidding.
spoiler alert. Spoiler alert for every fairy tale ever. The prince saves the princess. Wow. You know, it's just it's been done to death 1,000,001 times before. You know, I feel like with the other nuances he set up throughout the film, he could have maybe subverted that expectation and nobody would have been mad if he had, if he had changed it up a bit. But no, it's just another film where the helpless princess is saved by the weird prince who's not very princely. He's just this random dude, you know. So yeah, like the ending let me down, and it kind of tainted my view of everything else because I feel like he had set it up so well, and it just kind of fell at the last hurdle for this. Just all for Catherine Deneuve to be saved by some Lord Farquaad fucking motherfucker. Yeah.
Okay, so speaking of globalization, where we did a little bit early in the first segment, you know, this movie was made for French audiences, right? And it was only the second film at this point. It was made in 1970, and the only other fairy tale that had been put in French cinemas was Beauty and the Beast, Cocteau's Beauty and the Beast.
Mhm.
So it actually had, at least from a cinema sort of perspective, it actually had not been told 1,000 times yet. This was actually kind of a treat in a sense for something that they could, like, families could kind of take their kids to, right? And like or an opportunity to go see like a fairy tale on screen.
And I think that would help if you had the nostalgia for it. Like I can understand if I met like some random French person that loved that movie, everything I imagine with fairy tale, I'm like, that makes sense. It really does.
Yeah, not saying that to necessarily refute your point, Adam, but maybe just to provide context of like,
Yeah, see, I think my problem maybe is that I'm looking at it from the perspective of me watching the work of a respected filmmaker from an era that's known for its sort of radicalization and subversion.
yeah,
So that's probably what my problem is. Like, yeah, that makes sense. Like when I look at a, like, obviously, like I said, I saw Umbrellas of Cherbourg first, which is a musical in a sense that literally every line of dialogue is sang. Everyone sings all of their dialogue throughout the entire film,
mhm,
but there's no show tunes or anything like that. Nobody sort of ends up on a stage with loads of sort of background dancers and stuff like that. It's literally two people talking, but they're singing at each other basically for the whole
mhm,
way through the film. So I'm already used to Demi being creative with how to tell a story.
mhm,
So when I see this, then which kind of seems basic in comparison, and then sort of comparing it then even further with sort of French New Wave, even though Demi probably wasn't even really part of the French New Wave, but you know, comparing it to like, you know, a Godard or a Truffaut or even like his wife Varda, you know, it comes off very basic in comparison, and maybe that's my fault. I'm not appreciating it for what it is, which is, an adaptation of a fairy tale. So maybe I expected something too different or expected too much from what is essentially just a really sort of nice looking fairy tale.
When did Zazie come out? Oh, Zazie came out in 1960. So, Louis Malle did something similar with Zazie dans la Metro, at least where not that it was a fairy tale, but it wasn't, I mean, that is an animated film that is shot with not, like, without using animation.
Yeah,
right?
it's a live action, but it might as well be animation because it's just so balls to the wall and zany.
Right. So maybe it was more of like that type, because Louis Malle was also kind of an outsider in the French New Wave a little bit, even though he was working in that same era, right?
Yeah.
And those Louis Malle, it was also kind of big on like every film he made, or a lot of the films he made were just very different from each other. And maybe they were more. This is 10 years later, so it's not a perfect comparison, but maybe it was more of that style of thing, right? And then you even had Romer directed Percival the Gallant. Have y'all seen that?
I haven't. I know it exists because you wrote a review on it, but I haven't seen it. I'm not a big Romer guy.
It's a Knight's Tale, right? He was one of the Knights of the Round Table, but it was shot on a soundstage. And what they did was they created elaborate set pieces. So like the trees are very kind of like bubbly and animated looking, and the castles are very borderline kind of animated looking, but you can tell they're set pieces and they just kind of go back and forth on the soundstage. So there's a small kind of niche, it seems like, during the French New Wave time of directors taking these children's stories and sort of telling it in their own way. And maybe it fits more into that.
Cool. I think that might be a decent place to wrap it if anyone else has anything to bring up.
Unless we want to bring up the helicopter.
Oh, shit. We never talked about the helicopter.
If we don't talk about it, maybe it doesn't exist.
There's a helicopter in the movie.
For some reason.
For some reason, unbeknownst to anyone, there's a helicopter. This is why I think, what's the name of that actress again for the Delphine Seyrig. I think that she's a modern person who got sort of magicked into having to be in this film. That's my fan theory for Donkey Skin.
Wow, there's a helicopter.
She's from the real world. That's why she's in a helicopter at the end.
I like that. She's sultry as hell too.
Yeah.
I mean, if he really wanted to like jar me at the end, I honestly thought I'd like hit a button on my controller for like half a second. I was like, did I actually?
Okay, so now we come to our last section, which as always is any other business. Just a time at the end for us to bring up something that we've seen or want to talk about recently that we just want to give a shout out to. So I'm just going to hop in with mine quickly first, if that's okay. So obviously, as listeners probably know, we brought out a list of top 100 greatest films a few weeks ago. I've gotten some really interesting and fun reactions to it. A lot of sort of drive onto the website, which is always great to see. When I compiled the list, I noticed I had only seen about 70, I want to say about 77, 78 of the films out of 100. So I'm just sort of making it my business to try and get through the ones I haven't seen, just, because it'd be nice to be 100% complete on our own list.
Yeah.
So I was off for a few days last week. So I said, okay, I'm going to take this opportunity to watch the long films that I never normally get a chance to watch on a work day, because my girlfriend was working, but I was off. So I literally just had, it was my choice, whatever was on, I got to choose everything. So I said, no better opportunity than to sit through a 4-hour coming of age epic, which is A Brighter Summer Day from Edward Yang. So I went in with like pretty high expectations because obviously it was very high on our list, and I've seen it very high on a lot of other lists as well. Obviously 4-hour runtime is pretty daunting for anyone, but honestly, this film completely blew me away. It was 5 out of 5 rating for me on this. It's 4 hours long, but it really doesn't feel it just because of how well made the film is, how well told the story is. it never drags, nothing ever feels out of place. Just a really well put together film. Really well acted by a very young, inexperienced cast. Looks really great, nice, sumptuous colors. Yeah, it completely engrossed me, which is something that I wasn't expecting from a 4 hour film. As you guys know, I have my 3 digit runtime rule where any film over 3 digits is too long. But this broke the rule. This was a really fantastic film, and if you have 4 hours spare, I highly recommend watching it.
I'll have to get around to it at some point. I've never seen it.
Yeah, no, it's honestly it's great. I'm gonna try and watch Yi as well next time I have a day. That's kind of pretty long, but not as long. I think it's just under 3 hours. So that's not as long. I didn't get to it last week, but I'm gonna try and get to it again. I'm off next Friday because my birthday next Saturday, so I booked the Friday off. So I have a nice long weekend.
Nice.
So I might try and watch that next Friday when I'm off.
Is that happy birthday? Because we're not going to talk to you then.
Thank you.
Is that the first film you've seen from Edward Young?
No, I saw Taipei Story
Okay.
at the start of the year, and I didn't love it. It was just a bit too abstract. It was just kind of like Wong Kar-wai, but way more abstract, and characters I didn't really care as much about. Yeah, but yeah, brighter summer day was not to make a pun, but it was like a night and day between Taipei Story and actually, am I mixing this? Edward Yang did make Taipei Story, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. For a split second, I thought, oh shit, am I mixing up with that other guy, the Hao Xiaoxian, the other Taiwanese filmmaker? I thought I was mixing them up for a second, but yeah, this is my
me
second.
doubting it, but no, I'm almost sure.
No, it is. I just checked it. It is Yang.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah,
Zach, what about you, Zach?
I guess I had a couple I was going to go with, but I think I'm going to go with, for the first time, I finally got around to watching Excalibur, which I think ties in well to us watching Donkey Skin, and you mentioned Percival. So basically, this was a movie made by John Boorman back in the early 80s. And it's such an interesting film to watch because, like, from a story structure point, it's a little, I'm trying to think of the word, meandering. Like it's mixing like 4 or 5 different King Arthur legend stories into one. You get how the sword got into the stone, Arthur pulling the stone, the search for the Holy Grail, and a few other ones that are just kind of thrown in there. And it's amazing how beautiful the film looks because it has such like interesting cinematography. It's almost why, like, when we were talking about Donkey Skin, I mentioned, it'd probably be really cool to see John Boorman do it because it has that similar idea to it, that you're doing so much with the way the film looks, which is really interesting that it turned out the way it did, since the original cinematographer quit very early on because he lost a bunch of footage and just the camera guy had to come in and do the cinematography, be the director of photography for the whole film, and did such an excellent job. There is so much like iconic looks to the film. There's so much work done to have like almost like this muted looking area, but then you have like when Excalibur's around, you have like they use glow in the dark to give like this green look to it, and it looks great. The acting from everyone, Merlin, I can't remember think of the actor who plays Merlin, but he was great in it. It's just a fun film. It's definitely flawed. It definitely has like some story structure issues, but it's far, seeing Green Knight a few weeks ago really made me want to sit down and watch some of the older King Arthur movies, and I just really appreciated the way he went about it to try to mix in like so much to tell like one cohesive story, and just kind of do it in a really fun and action adventure sort of way.
Who does it have like a definitive kind of Blu-ray release?
Yes, it does have a Blu-ray release. I don't think it actually had many cut problems that I can remember. I think it's, from my understanding, it came out as intended. It was kind of mixed with critics, and it didn't do well in the box office, but it kind of got a cult following like years later once it just came out again, I think, from my understanding.
That's cool. Yeah, it feels like one of those things that like a Vinegar Syndrome or one of those companies would do like a big kind of special edition of.
It'd be nice if it had a nicer special edition because I mean it's pretty bare bones, but it works.
Cool. Okay, well, quickly, I'll. There's so much to talk about. It's been a fun kind of couple of weeks. I've fell into a nice rhythm of watching movies, but just two that I'll kind of highlight quickly. So, Arrow put out this set called Black Society Trilogy. It's Takashi Miike films, and there's three movies in it that are all kind of tied thematically. They're based in Taiwan, but it's obviously he's a Japanese director, and it's like this sort of culture clash between people that are half Japanese and half Taiwanese, or maybe Japanese but living in Taiwan, or that's the kind of theme that links the three movies. Police and criminals play a role in this as well, but the films are quite different once you get beyond that. The first one is Shinjuku Triad Society, which if anybody knows anything about Takashi Miike, he never shies away from showing violence or gore. And that's probably more in line with what people would expect from him. Like it's very, like when there is the family that kind of does this criminal family, they're involved in organ trafficking, and so adults and children both. And it's this kind of some of the scenes. Luckily, none of the scenes are horrific with children, but some of the scenes with the organ donors and the humans at least, or the adults at least, is pretty graphic and pretty brutal. Very very Miyake. But the kind of that's contrasted with this sweet sort of story about this guy who's trying to save his brother from falling into this crime family. And then in the second one in the series, Rainy Dog, it's another one that it ties into like different definitions of family. So there's this guy who's an assassin, and one of his old love, I don't know if it's a fling or just a girlfriend, he didn't know that she got pregnant, and she brings his son over to him as like an 8 or 9 year old boy who doesn't speak, and she drops him in and says, "Here, it's your problem now," and like leaves in a taxi. And this assassin is sort of like conflicted on that because this boy now gets in the way of him doing his job well, and he meets a prostitute, not in the way that Pandora's Box is portrayed, but an actual prostitute, and they form this kind of it's oddly sweet. They form this kind of love family from very broken backgrounds, and very broken people form this family that kind of works. And so anyways, and then I'm getting the ley lines here in the next day or two, but I just am so impressed with Takashi Miike, like as a filmmaker. I think a lot of times people think about Audition, or they think about Ichi the Killer and how gruesome it is, and that's what people talk about, and that's certainly there, but he's got such a cool, like innate ability to tell a story underneath all of the violence, and I think that's really on display here. And then the only other thing I'll talk about just quickly is I've started my Jodorowsky run. And I made the decision I knew I wasn't going to like the movies if I just watched them. I don't like watching modern art. Anyways, I'm not there yet. So I watched all the movies with the commentary, and that's totally changed my experience. It's like, I was kind of telling you all a minute ago, but it's sort of this idea of like walking through a museum with the audio headset on, explaining like what's going on. And, like you can argue with Jodorowsky's take on things. Like he certainly has a higher opinion of himself than anybody would ever have of him. But even in that ego, he still does explain like his intent here, and like what he's trying to do, and like why this image was brought in. And, in El Topo specifically, which is kind of where I'm at this point, he talks through his own journey of going through different spiritual practices and learning from them, and how that was like brought into the film, and his desire to use film in the same way, so people can engage with his movies in the same way that people engage with like the Bible or the Quran or like these spiritual texts. He was trying to do that same thing with film. Again, I don't agree with the execution of that. Like, I don't think he did that. But it was interesting hearing his own mind and just how he thought about the movies. And I'm grateful that he's alive still to be able to talk about it. I'm a little bit nervous going into Holy Mountain. I think that's supposed to be his most kind of uncomfortable film to watch, like with animal cruelty, as well as the way that some of the nudity is kind of portrayed, like in a sense of a little bit more violent, I guess.
It's my second favorite that's not Santa Sagre.
Okay.
That one. Yeah, I like Holy Mountain. I like it better than El Topo personally.
Okay, cool. Well, that's good to hear. Yeah, the animal violence in his movies is hard to see sometimes. He doesn't shy away from it. I think well, anyways, yeah, that he doesn't, he uses it for art, but it's hard to watch sometimes, or it's hard to watch in general. But yeah, so those are, there's a lot of different things I'm going through. Next time we talk, is that true? Anyways, in October, I'm gonna start the Jason run. I've seen all those movies before, but I'm finally gonna get to the Scream Factory box set, so I'm excited for that. But yeah, that's my any other business. Oh, and I just got this Sinbad. So I'm Sinbad box set that Indicator put out. It's the first, or it's 3 Sinbad movies from Harryhausen. The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, and the Golden Voyage of Sinbad, and the Golden Shower of Sinbad. No, I'm just kidding. Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger. Those are the 3 movies that I'm going to be watching. And
I saw that one when I was I used to have a VHS of it.
Awesome.
The Eye of the Tiger. I'll never forget the image of the skeletons are just sort of fried in my brain from being scared of them as like I'd say I must have been like 4 or 5 maybe at most.
Yeah.
The VHS for the Eye of the Tiger, and yeah, the skeletons used to freak me out.
That's awesome. Well, I think I'm gonna watch one to make sure it's okay, but I'm definitely gonna try to show these to my 4-year-old as well. So we'll see.
Yeah, you don't want to scar them like I was scared, I suppose.
Exactly.
That wraps up this week's episode of They Live by Film. If you want to read more of our thoughts, visit theylivebyfilm.com. And you can also follow our Letterboxd, Reddit, and Instagram accounts from the links in the description. For now, take care.